The whisper froze Robert Sterling's blood in the exclusive Manhattan Steakhouse. The billionaire tech mogul was dining with his latest conquest when the waitress leaned close and delivered those devastating words. The $1,000 bottle of Camus Cabernet shattered on the marble floor as the entire restaurant watched in stunned silence. The young waitress had his green eyes, the same stubborn jaw he saw in the mirror every morning. But she wasn't there for money or revenge. From her apron, she pulled a medical report. Her 6-year-old daughter, the granddaughter Robert never knew existed, was dying of leukemia. She needed a bone marrow transplant urgently, and he might be the only compatible donor. Elena gave him 3 days to decide whether to be a grandfather or remain a stranger. As she walked away, Robert felt 23 years of cowardice crash down on him. In his wallet, the faded photo of Anna, the only woman he'd ever loved and abandoned, seemed to accuse him. He didn't know yet that the sick child would heal not just herself, but an entire broken family. The Bull and Bear Steakhouse occupied prime real estate on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the glittering cityscape like a monument to success. Robert Sterling commanded his usual corner table with the unconscious authority of a man who'd spent 30 years conquering Silicon Valley and Wall Street alike. At 55, he embodied American success. Silver hair perfectly styled, custom Tom Ford suit worth more than most people's cars, a Patek Philippe on his wrist that could buy a house in the suburbs. His companion that evening, Madison, was the typical 20-something model he collected like vintage wines, unaware she was merely the latest in an endless parade of meaningless conquests. The restaurant hummed with the conversations of Manhattan's elite, deals being made over dry-aged beef and bottles of wine that cost more than minimum wage workers earned in a month. Elena Ross moved through the dining room with practiced invisibility. 3 years of serving New York's wealthy, having taught her that survival meant being seen only when pouring wine or clearing plates. 23 years old, her brown hair pulled back in a severe bun that concealed its natural shine, the crisp uniform hiding more than just her figure. It concealed a secret she'd carried with infinite patience, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal it. She'd studied Robert for months, memorizing his patterns with scientific precision. Every Tuesday and Friday at 8 o'clock, same table, different woman, but always interchangeable. She'd chosen this particular evening because the restaurant was packed with faces from the business pages of the Wall Street Journal, perfect witnesses for what was about to unfold. The approach was calculated with surgical precision. Elena carried the 2016 Camus Special Selection, a $1,000 bottle Robert invariably ordered to impress his dates. Her hands remained steady as she poured, years of mental preparation making her unshakable. Only when she leaned close to Robert's ear did she deliver the words she'd rehearsed countless times in her studio apartment mirror, whispering them with a calm that contradicted the storm raging inside her. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The wineglass slipped from Robert's fingers as if his hands had forgotten their purpose. Crystal exploded against marble with a sound that seemed to stop time itself. The dark wine spread across the white floor, while Robert turned with the slowness of someone afraid to confirm a nightmare. Elena remained motionless beside him as 200 pairs of eyes converged on the scene. Madison emitted a small, strangled sound that no one noticed. Elena's eyes were fixed on Robert, those same green eyes he'd last seen in Anna's face, the red-haired cellist he'd loved and abandoned when she'd told him she was pregnant. Recognition hit Robert like a physical blow. The resemblance was undeniable. Elena had inherited his stubborn jaw, his way of standing as if ready for battle, but the eyes and grace were all Anna's. 23 years of denial crumbled in an instant. Robert attempted to speak, but his throat seemed sealed. Elena took advantage of his silence to extract a folded document from her apron, with deliberate movements. She placed it on the table with the same precision she would have used to serve a plate of haute cuisine. It was a report from Mount Sinai Hospital. The words acute lymphoblastic leukemia and urgent transplant dancing on the paper like a death sentence. The revelation that followed was delivered in a steady voice that carried to every corner of the silent restaurant. Sophia, 6 years old, his granddaughter, a child Robert didn't know existed, was dying. Elena had been tested, but wasn't a match. The probability that a biological grandfather would be compatible was high. It was their only hope. Elena clarified her intentions immediately. She didn't want money, didn't want the sterling name, didn't demand a place in his life, only that he save an innocent child. She gave him 3 days to decide, leaving her number with the document. Before turning away, she added that Anna had died the previous year, taking with her the love for a man who'd abandoned her but never forgotten her. Anna's name hit Robert like a physical assault. His hand went instinctively to his wallet where, hidden behind platinum credit cards, he still kept a faded photograph. Anna smiled from the photo with that natural joy he'd extinguished with his cowardice. Elena left the restaurant, leaving behind a shattered man. The billionaire who controlled empires and destinies had been brought to his knees by a truth served with the same coldness with which he'd served abandonment 23 years earlier. Robert's penthouse overlooking Central Park, $20 million of marble and glass, felt like a luxurious tomb that night. Sleep eluded him as he sat in his study, the medical report in one hand, Anna's photograph in the other. The ghosts of the past danced in the shadows cast by the city lights. Anna Ross had been different from all the others. A cellist with extraordinary talent, beautiful with that natural beauty that needs no artifice, with a laugh that could transform a gray room into a garden. They'd met when Robert was 32, taking his first steps toward the empire he would build. For 1 year, they'd been inseparable. Robert had even bought a ring, hidden in his desk drawer, waiting for the perfect moment. Perfection died the day Anna told him she was pregnant. Panic had overwhelmed him like ice water. He saw his future transforming from world conquest to diapers and sleepless nights. The freedom he considered essential for success, evaporating into unwanted responsibilities. That night, in an act of cowardice that had secretly tormented him for 2 decades, he disappeared. A check for $100,000 and a cowardly letter left on the kitchen table while Anna slept. He'd never tried to find out what happened after. He'd buried Anna and the unborn child under layers of success and faceless women. But now his daughter was real, tangible, with a daughter of her own fighting for life. Morning brought the ruthless efficiency that had made Robert a titan of industry. His assistant Michael received orders to discover everything about Elena Ross. The dossier arrived in 2 hours. Elena had raised Sophia alone after the child's father died in an accident when Sophia was 6 months old. 2 jobs to pay for medical care. A cramped 2-bedroom in Queens. Pride that prevented her from asking anyone for help. The photos of Sophia in the dossier were another blow. The child had Anna's red hair and something in her smile that reminded Robert of himself as a boy. Recent photos from the hospital showed a 6-year-old warrior fighting with grace, a battle she shouldn't have to fight. The call to the hospital confirmed the severity. Sophia Ross, pediatric oncology ward, critical condition. Without a transplant within weeks, chances were minimal. Robert scheduled his compatibility test for that afternoon, using a false name to avoid media attention. The public hospital was an alien world for Robert, accustomed to private Swiss clinics. The pediatric oncology ward was particularly heartbreaking. Children made bald by chemotherapy played with incomprehensible courage, while parents wore maps of suffering and hope on their faces. Fate or chance led him to room 247. Through the cracked door, he saw Elena sitting beside a small bed, reading a story with different voices for each character. Sophia, pale under a colorful bandana, laughed weakly. In that moment, Robert saw Anna in Elena's profile, in the way she tilted her head when she smiled, in the infinite gentleness toward her sick daughter. Elena looked up and saw him. She rose, stepped out of the room, closing the door gently, and they faced each other in the sterile corridor. The acknowledgement that he'd come for the test wasn't a question, but a statement. Robert attempted to articulate apologies for 23 years of absence, but Elena stopped him. She didn't want justifications, only compatible Marrow. If he was a match and donated, they'd never have to see each other again. When Robert asked if he could see them after, if he could know Sophia, Elena was crystal clear. He'd had 23 years to want that. It was too late to play father or grandfather. Sophia believed her grandfather had died before she was born. It was better that way. As the nurse led him away for the blood draw, Robert looked once more through the glass. Sophia was sleeping now, small and fragile in the hospital bed. Elena had resumed her post as sentinel, watching over that precious life. Robert uttered an apology that Elena didn't acknowledge, lost as she was in her daughter's world. The call came at dawn. Robert was compatible at 90%, an almost miraculous match. The doctor explained the transplant could be scheduled within the week. There had never really been a choice to make. From the moment he'd seen Sophia, Robert knew he would do anything. When he informed Elena of the compatibility and his decision to proceed, the silence on the other end was long. The thank you that followed was loaded with held tears and a hope she hadn't dared nurture. Robert arranged for Sophia's transfer to a private suite. The best specialists, everything money could buy.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
Elena protested weakly, but Robert's determination was granite. It wasn't charity, he insisted. It was the minimum. In the days before the transplant, Robert found himself gravitating around the hospital like a satellite around its planet. He didn't enter Sophia's room. He respected Elena's boundaries, but he remained nearby, observing, learning. He watched Elena destroyed by exhaustion, pretending energy for Sophia. He watched Sophia weaken physically, but strengthen spiritually with each passing day. One afternoon, while Elena had rushed home for a shower and clean clothes, Robert heard Sophia call weakly from the room. Instinct won over prudence, and he entered. The child studied him with eyes too wise for her age, asking who he was. Robert introduced himself as a friend of her mother's, an old friend from long ago. Sophia analyzed him with the sharp intelligence of children who've seen too much. She noticed he seemed sad and asked if it was because of her, because she was sick. Robert felt his heart break when he answered that he was sad for lost time. Sophia, with disarming wisdom, said time could always be recovered, that Mommy always said it was never too late to do the right thing. Elena found them like that, Robert sitting beside the bed while Sophia showed him her drawings. Initial panic transformed into weary resignation when Sophia explained that the nice man was keeping her company. Thus began a strange routine. Robert watched over Sophia when Elena had to leave, reading stories, helping with small puzzles, always careful not to reveal his true identity. One day, Sophia confided that she'd like to have a grandfather like her friends, someone to take her to the park, teach her things, help Mommy who was always tired. Robert nearly choked on emotion, understanding fully how his abandonment had deprived this wonderful child not just of a grandfather, but of a complete family network. Transplant day arrived gray and rainy. Robert had been admitted the evening before for preparation. For a man accustomed to absolute control, putting himself completely in others' hands was terrifying. But strangely, there was also peace. For the first time in 23 years, he was doing the right thing. Elena came to see him the night before the operation. She sat beside the bed and finally asked why. Why had he run? Robert had no elaborate justifications. He admitted his cowardice, fear of losing freedom and ambitions. the selfishness of youth. When Elena asked if he'd ever really loved Anna, Robert confessed she'd been the only true love of his life. Every woman after had been a failed attempt to forget. The photo in his wallet had been his silent companion for 23 years. Elena then revealed what Robert didn't know. Anna had waited for him for years, inventing excuses, hoping for a return that never came. Only when Elena turned 10 had she finally admitted the truth. She'd died of pancreatic cancer, swift and brutal, 6 months from diagnosis to end. With trembling hands, Elena handed Robert a letter Anna had made her promise never to deliver. But now, she said, he had the right to read it. Anna's elegant handwriting filled the page with words of forgiveness. Not for Robert, Anna wrote, but for herself, so she could raise Elena without bitterness. She'd loved him enough to understand he wasn't ready, but had also been strong enough not to wait forever. Robert wept, like he hadn't wept since childhood. For Anna, for Elena, for Sophia, for all the years wasted in empty success. Elena, in an unexpected gesture, took his hand. She said, saving Sophia was more than many grandfathers would do. It was a beginning. Perhaps they could find a way to be family, not as father and daughter, it was too late for that, but as something new. The morning of the operation, Robert was wheeled to surgery with strange serenity. The anesthesia took him gently, and his last thought was of Anna, hoping she was watching with that smile he'd loved so much. He woke hours later with Elena beside him. The transplant had gone well. Sophia was already receiving his marrow. The doctors were optimistic. Robert asked to see Sophia, but she had to remain in isolation. Elena showed him a video on her phone. Sophia in her sterile bed, but smiling, thanking him for the special medicine from his body, calling him a superhero, and asking if they could get ice cream when she was better. Robert watched the video countless times, memorizing every detail of his granddaughter's face. The following weeks were an anxious wait, filled with hope and terror. Robert's marrow engrafted well, and Sophia began the slow climb back to health. Color gradually returned to her cheeks, energy to her movements. Doctors began using words like remission and positive prognosis. Robert completely transformed his life. The business meetings that once dominated every hour were delegated. He spent afternoons at the hospital, learning the rhythms of illness and healing. He learned to make mac and cheese exactly how Sophia liked it, to read stories with the right voices, to braid hair terribly, but Sophia laughed and said it was fine. The revelation of his true identity happened naturally. During dinner in the new apartment Robert had rented for them, Elena had accepted only after much insistence and only for Sophia. The child asked what kind of relative he was. Robert looked at Elena, who nodded slightly. He knelt to be at Sophia's level and simply told her he was her grandfather, her mom's dad. Sophia's reaction was explosive joy. She launched herself into Robert's arms with such force she nearly knocked him over, shouting that she knew he was special, that now she had a real grandpa like all her friends. The word grandpa from Sophia's lips was worth more than all of Robert's financial successes. Elena slowly lowered her defenses. During the long hospital hours, they began to really talk. Robert discovered Elena had inherited Anna's musical talent, that she played violin for Sophia every night. Elena discovered Robert's empire was empty without someone to share it with. They began building something that wasn't the father-daughter relationship they could have had, but something new, forged in shared pain and common hope. The day Sophia was discharged was a contained but profound celebration. Robert had prepared a bright apartment in a better neighborhood, with a room full of books for Sophia and a piano in the living room so she could learn when she was strong enough. It wasn't an attempt to buy affection, but to be present in the way he could. 1 year later, life had found its new balance. Sophia was in complete remission, a vibrant child running in Central Park, with energy finally freed from illness. Robert had drastically downsized his corporate role, delegating daily operations to focus on what he now considered his real job, being a grandfather. The relationship with Elena remained complex but functional. They would never be father and daughter in the traditional sense. Too much had happened, but they'd found their own way to be family. Robert had also created a foundation in Anna's name to help families with children battling leukemia, with Elena as co-director, using their experience to guide others through that terrible journey. One Sunday afternoon at the house in the Hamptons Robert had bought for them, Elena had accepted only after he'd insisted it was for Sophia, Robert reflected on his life's transformation. A year ago, he'd been a billionaire with everything and nothing. Now he had marker stains on expensive shirts, knew every bedtime story by heart, and his phone was full of Sophia's pictures instead of models. Elena sat beside him on the garden bench, bringing 2 coffees. It had become their Sunday ritual. Sophia played, they watched, and talked. Elena said Anna would have been happy to see all this. When Robert asked if she'd forgiven him, Elena replied she was learning. Every day she saw him with Sophia erased a bit of anger. They'd never be what they could have been, but they could be something different, something new. Sophia ran toward them with a frog she'd found in the garden, asking to keep it. Robert and Elena exchanged a conspiratorial look while negotiating with the child. It was a scene of extraordinary ordinariness, an imperfect but real family. That evening, putting Sophia to bed, she asked why he hadn't been there before. Robert explained he'd made a big mistake by running away, but now he was here and would never leave again. Sophia, with the practical wisdom of children, accepted the explanation. "Everyone makes mistakes," she said. "The important thing is learning." And he'd learned that family is the most important thing in the world. Sophia's birthday arrived with a party that included all the extended family Robert had never known. Elena's siblings, cousins, a network of affection that now cautiously included him. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions and wounds not completely healed, but it was real. Years later, when Sophia would graduate from medical school, dedicating her thesis to her parents, to Mom who never gave up, and to Grandpa who had the courage to come back, Robert would understand this was his true legacy. Not the billions in the bank, but love rebuilt brick by brick. The family he had now wasn't the one he would have had if he'd stayed. It was built on foundations of pain and forgiveness, imperfect and complicated. But it was his, real, and infinitely more precious than any financial empire. Every evening, looking at Anna's photo now displayed next to those of Elena and Sophia, Robert whispered thanks. For forgiveness, for the second chance, for learning that sometimes a waitress's courage can transform a billionaire into something infinitely more precious, a grandfather who finally learned to stay. Like if you believe it's never too late to fix mistakes, comment with the moment that touched you most. Share to celebrate the power of forgiveness and second chances. Subscribe for more stories of redemption and family love. Sometimes it takes 23 years to travel the shortest distance in the world, the one between regret and forgiveness. Sometimes a sick child can heal more than any medicine can. She can heal a broken family. And sometimes, just sometimes, a waitress's courage can transform a billionaire into something infinitely more precious, a grandfather